It's finally that time of year for voters to cast their ballots for the Baseball Hall of Fame. Results will be released on January 26, and we might be looking at a second straight year where nobody gets elected. It's a very slow time of the year for baseball, and even more so this year with the lockout in progress. The Hall of Fame is all fans have to look forward to right now, and it would be a major disappointment if nobody's elected again. This is Greg Wilson with Dropout Sports, and here's what my 2022 Hall of Fame ballot would look like. It's definitely a weird year to be a Hall of Fame voter for the BBWAA. Most players with deserving stats were associated with steroids in some way. You have Barry Bonds, Roger Clemens, and Curt Schilling all in their last year on the ballot. If they don't reach that 75% threshold, they won't have another chance for a long time. Those big names are also joined by newcomers to the ballot, Alex Rodriguez and David Ortiz, along with many more. But before I talk about them, I want to talk about the guys I would vote for who I think should have no argument against them at all. Scott Rowland is the first one of those guys. He was always a consistently great player everywhere he went for 17 seasons. He finished his career with a very nice 69.9 career Fangraphs WAR and a 122 weighted runs created plus. He had just over 2,000 hits in his career and hit 316 home runs. To top it all off, he also had 114 defensive runs saved in his career. He started playing in 1996, and the DRS stat wasn't even created until 2002, so he likely could have added more onto that. Now on to the next player. Let me introduce you to a hypothetical player. Let's say this player was the best defensive center fielder that ever played baseball. Of all the people to ever play that position, not a single one was better. Now, what if I told you that hypothetical player also hit 434 home runs in his career? You would probably agree with me that that player should be in the Hall of Fame, right? Well, I lied to you. That player isn't hypothetical at all. That player was Andruw Jones. There's no reason Andruw Jones should not be in the Hall of Fame. Todd Helton is the next guy I would check off my list. He had a slash line in his career of 316, 414, 539. There have only been 19 players to finish a full career with a batting average above 300, an on-base percentage above 400, and a slugging percentage above 500. Todd Helton is one of them. Sure, he played in Coors Field where the offense is boosted, but look at all the other guys who played in Colorado and didn't do that. Billy Wagner is a relief pitcher that gets my vote. He had a career 187 ERA+, which is almost up there with Mariano Rivera's 205 ERA+. Wagner also had a win probability added of 28.4. When you look at the modern reliever, I think the way you look at their stats for Hall of Fame voting needs to be updated from what it used to be. He was as good as any reliever at the time. He had a career ERA of 2.31 over his 16 years. Now for the votes I might get some backlash over. Before I talk about them, I want to show you what you look like first of all when you argue against players who use steroids making it into the Hall of Fame. This is you. Here you are yelling at me about thinking these guys deserve to make it in. Nurse. Excuse me, nurse. This man broke out of the nursing home again. Yeah, he's been yelling at me about Barry Bonds and Alex Rodriguez. Could you take him back? Cool, thank you. All right. Barry Bonds is the greatest all-around outfielder to ever play the game of baseball. He is second all-time in career Fangraphs WAR with 164.4. That's behind only Babe Ruth, who played when replacement players were much worse. 762 home runs, 2,558 walks, a weighted on-base average of 435, and a career weighted runs created plus of 173. He was a Hall of Famer before he was suspected of taking steroids, and he's definitely a Hall of Famer now. Roger Clemens has a very similar argument to Barry Bonds. He played during the steroid era when there were a ton of players taking them. He's, in my opinion, the second best pitcher in baseball history. Clemens pitched until he was 44 and was great the entire time. He has 7 Cy Young awards to his name. There's no reason he should not be in. Alex Rodriguez gets my next vote. Yes, I know, he was actually suspended for steroids, but he's 13th all-time on the Fangraphs WAR leaderboard with 113.7. That's right ahead of Mickey Mantle, an all-time great. By now, you know I don't care about steroid users. He was a top hitter in the league up until his very last year with the Yankees in 2016. 20 years of dominance is worthy of a Hall of Fame vote. Manny Ramirez is another guy who was suspended for steroids, but his stats are good enough to be in the Hall of Fame. And it would be inconsistent of me to allow A-Rod in and not him. Manny Ramirez also gets my vote. Sammy Sosa was a big part of saving the game of baseball with the home run chase that him and Mark McGwire competed in 1998. He hit 66 home runs that year and had a 9.9 Fangraphs WAR in 2001. His good years lasted long enough, and his career 60.1 WAR makes him a Hall of Famer for sure. He tested positive for steroids voluntarily in 2003 when MLB was trying to crack down on it, but he was never suspended for that. David Ortiz is another guy who tested positive in 2003. He also tested voluntarily like Sammy Sosa did, but he's another guy who also gets my vote for the Hall of Fame. Just like I said about Billy Wagner, you need to compare players to others who played the same position as them. When you're talking designated hitters like David Ortiz, I think they need to be compared to other designated hitters when you're talking about the Hall of Fame. Sure, he doesn't live up to the standards of Edgar Martinez, but if Ortiz doesn't make it in, the case for future DHs that are on the ballot gets much worse because David Ortiz was as good as any of them. So, those are the guys that I think should be in the Hall of Fame. If there were more than 10 votes allowed on a single ballot, I would have included guys like Gary Sheffield and maybe Bobby Abreu, but I think the other 10 are most deserving this year. Why don't you let me know in the comments what you think about my choices and who you would have chosen instead? You can even yell at me in the comments about steroids if you want to. But that's all I have for today.
Just a bunch of dropouts.